Hi everyone, and welcome to the IA feedback session for your IBDP psychology. This is a general roundup of things I noticed that most people did within this round of grading, and just a few pointers to help you. Please also watch the other videos. There is one on how to write a null and research hypothesis. Some of you need to really go back and do that again because it's quite a key part. If you get that wrong, that will have a knock on effect on your whole grade. And there are some other videos going through example IAs and showing you what grade they got. So I would recommend that you watch those as well before you even start redrafting your IA. I hope this helps. Okay, so first things first, on your top page, some of you either just didn't do it or you didn't do it in the format that the IB needs. And I just think this might be because you missed the Canvas note that I put on there. If you're not getting these Canvas notes, please double check the announcements. I've put some videos up also of how to answer paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, and just walk and talk you through those. So make sure that you're watching these, otherwise you're missing out on these vital resources. So the top page, you need to make sure that you've got the title of your investigation, your IB candidate code when you find it out, the IB candidate codes for all group members. Please don't put their names or your names on. The date, the month, and the year of the submission of this, and then just your word count. And just in your appendix, you need to make sure that you have all of the following. Some of you had most, but you didn't include a few of them. So just double check them and tick them off. Your raw data tables from the website that you used, whether this is VastaStats or whatever it is, you can just screenshot that. Calculations and results from this. Consent forms that you made for your participants, a copy of the standardized instructions that you gave to your participants. So this is your procedure, essentially. A copy of the debrief you gave to your participants, any supplementary materials, pictures, word lists, anything like this, and also your ethics. How did you meet the ethical criteria? Many of you did not include this, or you included it within the main body of your IA, which is unnecessary and takes away a lot of your word count. You just need to mention in your IA that you've done it, and please refer to it in your appendix. So any of that ethics conversation that you've had, you can take that out and reuse those words in another section. Things to note. Yeah, just first one, it was clear that you're not reading the Canvas announcements. Perhaps that's because you don't know where they are. Just go and have another look on your Canvas page, because I am sending out announcements with video clips on. And there's lots of reference. There will be lots of subject material as well in there for your revision. So please make sure that you have a look. I find it easier to watch a video than read often. So hopefully it will help you. Just general formatting issues. Please format in Times New Roman 12 point and do your 2-point spacing. It's just easier to read that way. And make sure you've double checked your top page and taken all the names off your report. Okay, so going into your introduction then. Here is what you need to make sure that you have in it. Please pause the video and maybe put this on split screen with your IA and have a look, and maybe I like to highlight, so I'd give this like green, a red, and the yellow, and then I just highlight in my work to see where I had done this, and that just gives me a really good understanding of whether I've done it or I've missed it out. Just a useful tip for you there. So the aim of the investigation is stated and its relevance is explained. So you need to tell me, many of you told me what you were doing, the aim, but you didn't really tell me why it was important in the world. A lot of the higher grades in IA, the reason that they get the higher grades is because they're thinking holistically. Why are we even observing whether memory recall is happening? What is the bigger picture of that, and how is it applied to the world around us? Why do we need to know about memory recall in students versus memory recall in Alzheimer's patients? How is this going to help us? The theory or model upon which your investigation is based on. Yeah, many of you, I would say you described that very well, but it wasn't really clear whether you understood it. It was that you could give the the words that describe the theory, but what is the theory about in relation to why you're doing your experiment. It was a little bit like you were just going through the process of, oh, we have to do this because it's an IA for psychology. Well, yes, this is true, but also you need to show the examiner that you understand why they've been asked, why you've been asked to do this. What is it that you're really keen to look at, because you did have a big choice in which one to do. So why did you choose the experiment to replicate? What interested you about psychology? That's really what they want to know here. And also the independent and dependent variables are stated and operationalized in the null and research hypotheses. Please note, if you don't know how to do this, I've created a little video for you. It's really short. Just go back and watch it. Many of you did tell me what the independent variables and the dependent ones were, but you put it in the next section. It needs to be in this section, and it needs to be in a research hypotheses. Okay. I also saw a lot of people stating this experiment. It's really unclear if you write that. And because a lot of you have done it, I just question whether you were given a sheet of paper that said do that. You have to be quite specific. Our group decided to replicate and then tell me what experiment you were replicating, or the replication of the original and then tell me what the study was that my group partook. There's some controversy about putting I or my in, but remember, this is a report, it's not an essay, so we need to understand what you did in your experiment as much as we need to understand what the original experiments were. So just think about your wording there. It needs to be obvious to the examiner that what the difference is between the experiment and the replication you did as a group. Also, many of you did not state the modifications you made from the original study. In many of the studies that you will be looking at, or many of the experiments that you were replicating, there would have been maybe 3, 4, 5 conditions, lots of different groups, and you were only allowed to do 2 conditions, 2 groups. That is a modification. If there were 5 groups doing different things in your in the original experiment and you just changed to 2, that's a modification. We need to know about that. I didn't see many people writing about the modifications that they'd actually made. If the original study used 30 words and you used 10, that's a modification. You are replicating and changing. Modification just means change. So please go back and tell us what it actually is that you changed from their experiment. And then again, state the IV and DV specifically for your experiment. We just talked about that. Go back, rewatch the hypothesis writing video. Here's a link just to the information from the video as well, so you can reuse that if you like. And real big point here for the differences between the kind of 5s, 6s and 7s. You must link the theory to your investigation. So many of you told me what the theory was, and then you told me what the experiment was, that the original experiment, and then you told me something about your replication, but none of that was linked. Why did the original experiment happen, and why is that interesting to investigate this theory or phenomenon, and specifically in the participant choice that you've chosen, which for most of you, I think, not all of you, but most of you, is 15, 17, maybe 16, 17, 16 to 18 year old Australian girls at Stanford. Australian girls at MLC. So you need to tell us that, because why is it that you chose those participants? I understand for many of you it was because of the time frame of the IA, but also there is a real interest in studying things in students, so you need to kind of frame it on that point of view, and also how it's applicable to their lives in the future. A lot of you talking about memory, recall, and learning and things like this, and just try and think of the wider application of how this might help with study skills or exams or memorization. Try and link it to something tangible. Okay, so the exploration, part 2, worth 4 marks, the slightly less weighting section. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things we need to do in this section. Again, 5 different colours for highlighting in your draft. Just use the highlight tool on Word. It's really effective. The research design is explained. Many of you described your research design. That's great, but you need to tell me why you did it that way. Only some of you did that. Give a reason. Why did you use one design over the other? Easy way to do it. The sampling technique is explained. Many of you just told me the words of the sampling technique, and then you didn't tell me what that sampling technique is. State and then describe. A really good trigger sentence to do this is, the sampling technique we used was blah, 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 which means that, blah, blah, blah. Which means that is a really helpful trigger sentence because it makes our brain explain things. Tell me why you chose those participants. And the controlled variables are explained. So this is where you're telling me a little bit more about your experiment, and also the choice of materials is explained. Many of you just listed your materials. That's great, but that is just listing, and we're looking for explanation. So maybe pick out 1 or 2 points. Why did you use pen and paper rather than laptop? Why did you use laptop? It's just telling us why you chose those things, because you do have a lot of choice in how you do all of this, even if it feels like you're just doing the same as the original. Why did you choose to do the same? Or did you modify that? Why did you do that? Yep, so here's a nice way to do it. What was your sampling method? State it, tell me what it means, and explain why you chose it over others. You don't need to talk a lot about your ethics in this section, but make sure it's stated in your procedure. Many of you missed that out. In your procedure, you didn't put that you'd considered the ethics through consent forms and things like that. And then put it in your appendix and to use the word count somewhere else. Okay, so analysis for 6 marks. Descriptive and inferential stats are appropriately and accurately applied. Most of you did this fairly well. There is some controversy about whether you need to explain which ones you picked. I referenced a website yesterday or last week that said you don't need to explain it, but you do need to tell us what you did. So most of you told me what you chose, and then quite a lot of you explained your choice. You don't need to do that anymore. So use that word count somewhere else. Just tell us which descriptive and inferential stats are being applied. The graph is correctly presented and addresses the hypotheses. So some of you who need to go back and correct your hypotheses will need to redo the graph. That needs to be in the title. Also, please make sure that your X and Y axis have levels of measurement in seconds, words, number of words recalled. Some of you missed that, and you will be downgraded for incorrect graph and incorrect table. That is the same with your tables. I need to know what level of measurement you used, and I need to know what unit that was in. Was it seconds? Was it number of words? What was it? Otherwise it's just numbers in a table we can't read. And the statistical findings are interpreted. No, it doesn't say stated, it says interpreted, which means that you need to say in the graph we can see that. In the table, in the second column, we can see that. Otherwise, you've just given us the data, and it's almost like you're expecting us to interpret it. I'm not being graded, and neither is the examiner. What we are grading is how you show us you interpret this. So you have to do it. If you don't do it, you won't get 6 marks on the analysis section. You'll just have put the data in and kind of said, here it is. I do understand it, but I'm not telling you that I understand it. So you've got to give us firm examples. And then you must link this back to the hypotheses. Does it accept or reject the null hypothesis? Restate that, and then tell me specifically where in the data set we see that this is rejected. If you haven't put your p-value in here, you need to do that. Some of you did forget to do that. So, you need to make sure that you pick out at least 1 point from your table and graph. And again, pause this video at any time, put your screen on split screen, and have a look to see whether you've done this. Here's some examples of sentences you might use. For example, it can be seen in the graph that this shows us that the y-axis states that. And you must put the measurements in the labeling. Okay, and then finally the evaluation, which is worth 6 marks, which is the more linguistic explanation of your analysis. So please note the findings of the student's investigation. Again, you could use red, amber, green and highlight where you've actually done this in your own text. And this becomes very obvious which parts you haven't done when you're highlighting like this. It's my favourite way to draft because it allows me to make sure that I've hit all the criteria or the design brief or whatever it is that I'm working on. And reference to the background theory or model. Many of you told me about the findings, but you didn't go back to why we were even doing this. Right back in the beginning, if you've explained this well in the introduction, the referencing of that will be really easy. Strengths and limitations in the design, sample and procedure. There's a bit of controversy on whether they would give you 6 marks if you just did 2 or just did 1 really well, but the criteria does state all 3. Some of you did not. You didn't tell me the strengths and limitations of your design. You didn't tell me the strengths and limitations of your sample. You didn't tell me the strengths and limitations of your procedure. They're stated and explained, so two-prong here. You've told me you understand what they are, the strengths and limitations, and you explained why they're strong and why that makes them limited. Some of you did this in a table. That's really nice for planning because it unpicks it in your mind, the strengths and limitations, but then you must write in prose. If I didn't make that comment on your work, hear it in this video. You do need to go back and put those into paragraphs because it's a report. Your evaluation is a written report. It's kind of a way that you can get more out of your word count, which I do think is very intellectual. But I think they would downgrade you for not writing in full prose. And the modifications, which is if I were to do this experiment again, I would change, are explicitly linked to the limitations of the design, sample, procedure of your investigation, and they're fully justified. Some of you did a really, really good job of this, and it was really nice to read how you would redo the experiment if you were to do it again. And I think in some of these sections that will be fairly obvious to you because when you were working with your team, you would have said, oh, that didn't go very well, and we would do it like this. So try and be honest about these things that happen. That's why we do replications. That's how research is submitted. It's not a negative thing. It's wonderfully positive because it allows us then to develop and grow. Okay, so here we go. State, define, explain. Again, pause the video if you need to. And this is a real biggie. I said this in the groups very explicitly when I kind of called you in, but I wonder whether in the past, or maybe you've had it in a booklet that somebody said it's okay to do this. It's not. The exam board has explicitly come out and said you cannot use, if I were to modify, I'd use a larger sample size as a weakness or modification. You can't use it. Take it out. Try and think of another strength or limitation of your sample. And if you're not sure how to do that, use the internet. Google what is the strength or limitation of a sample in an experiment and read what other people have written, because it will become more obvious to you when you do that. But this one, just to clarify, again, you cannot use, I would pick a larger sample size as a weakness or modification. You could say that about absolutely any experiment in the whole wide world. It's not something that's thoughtful. It's kind of a throwaway comment that is too obvious, as the exam board have stated. So try and think about your participant choice a bit more. And this takes me to the end of my video. I hope this helps. And like I say, there's a few more videos on hypothesis writing and then unpicking of exemplar IAs. So I would watch all of these videos, even if you just sit back, relax and listen before you go through your revisitation of your IA, because once you hand it in, that is it. All right. Thanks for listening.